Just how good is this 2024 Philadelphia Eagles roster compared to the Super Bowl team of 2017 and the Super Bowl team of 2022? We'll get into that and more on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. It's Wednesday. We have 11 days until Super Bowl 59 between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, a rematch of Super Bowl 57. I'm going to start previewing this game tomorrow. I'm not going to lie, I'm a little nervous about previewing this game. And the reason is I'm going to have to rewatch for the first time Super Bowl 57. And I don't know if I'm still emotionally ready to do that. I was always planning on doing it after they won a Super Bowl. I shouldn't have assumed it was against another team. I knew this day would come, so I don't even know what I'm talking about. But I personally have never went back and watched even the 15-minute highlight reel on YouTube. The only things I've ever seen about Super Bowl 57 since watching the game live are any sort of highlight clips on Twitter regarding Jalen Hurts' performance or Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown or some things that just hurt, right? The James Bradbury penalty at the end. And I do know to learn from that game to preview this one properly, I'm going to have to dive back into that tape, and I'm not looking forward to it. Even watching how good Jalen Hurts was in that game, it's going to sting because the fact that that performance didn't end in a ring is absolutely heartbreaking. But we got to do it because the Eagles have a chance at redemption, not this Sunday, but next Sunday in New Orleans. And I was starting to think about that in the 2022 team and what they did right, what they did wrong, what's different about this team, why could things be different this time around. And that kind of led me back to what they did right in 2017 against a dynasty and Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and the New England Patriots. Like, how did they get it done, and why didn't the 2022 Eagles get it done? So I just naturally started comparing these teams, and I was bored during the day, and I'm like, ooh, this would be a fun exercise. Because I was comparing all three of the teams and just wondering who has the best roster, I decided to create an ultimate team, a starting lineup of 22 players on offense and defense of those three teams combined. And I did make a rule that I can't repeat players. So I can't have two versions of A.J. Brown. I can't have the 2022 A.J. Brown and 2024. If I'm going to pick a player, I have to pick one variant, if you will, for our Marvel fans out there in the multiverse saga. I have to pick one variant of each guy. The, what's that new word for Marvel multiverse, like important superheroes? The anchor beings, right? If you've seen Deadpool and Wolverine. I'm really diving deep into the weeds for superhero, analogy, so I'm sorry. But if you get it, you understand. So that's the one rule that I did make, and I went through the offense and the defense. I want to start with the offense. I was actually surprised at the result of this roster. I had an idea. I felt like it was going to be very heavy, leaning towards 2022 with a nice balance of 2017 and 2024, but that actually was not the result. So let's start on offense. And yes, and I'm sorry, this is a typo. We did have 2022 Jalen Hurts as the quarterback, not 2024. As you can see, the Super Bowl 57 logo is there, not 59. And I put 22 Jalen Hurts over this year's Jalen, over 2017's Carson Wentz. And I do think that's pretty obvious. Like Carson Wentz in 2017, that's one of the best individual seasons from a player that I've ever seen. And without him doing what he did in that regular season, you don't get home field advantage. I don't think you win a Super Bowl without Carson. He was incredible, just unconscious, and he should have won MVP if he didn't get injured. But 2022 Jalen Hurts, that's one of the best years of quarterbacks ever had in NFL history. From start to finish, he completely dominated the regular season, as good of a passer as Carson was in 17, but also added the running element where he has over 14 rushing touchdowns that year, over 600, what did he have, like 600 to 700 rushing yards. So there was that element that Carson had, but not to the level of Jalen. And then he, unlike Carson, won playoff games and had, maybe outside of Nick Foles, the second greatest Super Bowl performance in NFL history. So I think it was obvious that Jalen in 2022 was the quarterback over 2017 Wentz. Over this year's Jalen, who I think is very underrated because of Saquon Barkley, what he's done this year to go on that tear after the bye week where he's got over 30 touchdowns on the year and just one interception in the final, 13 games? Like, unbelievable. He dominated in the NFC Championship this year. I thought that was his best performance in a playoff win of his career. But I do think it's obvious that 2022 Jalen Hurts, he's the ultimate quarterback of those 3 Super Bowl appearances. The running back, this one, I mean, do we need an explanation? It's 2024 Saquon Barkley, one of the greatest performances an NFL player has ever had in a single season. It's the best running back season of all time, the best individual season for an Eagle ever, even over 22 Jalen Hurts, 17 Carson Wentz. Like Saquon, obviously you put over Miles Sanders, although you got to shout out that 2017 running back trio. Without Jay Ajayi, LeGarrette Blount, Corey Clement, you don't win a Super Bowl. Those guys almost combined for 300 yards from scrimmage in Super Bowl 52, but this one's obvious. You got to put Saquon there. And then at wide receiver, I got 3 guys. So remember, the rule is I cannot pick the same guy more than once. So I have the 2022 version of A.J. Brown, the 2024 version of Devontae Smith, and then the 2017 version of Alshon Jeffrey. And you can interchange all 3 of them on the outside, in the slot. I think although the numbers are the lowest of his career because of injuries, this year's version of Devontae Smith was the smoothest, the best route runner, the most versatile, playing inside and out. Some of the most jaw-dropping touchdown catches against Jacksonville, against Cincinnati. He was so clutch this year on third downs, in the fourth quarter of close games, in the playoffs. He is now the all-time leading receiver in Eagles history. I think this year's version of Smitty is the best version. 2022 A.J. Brown, unconscious. And I know this year's Brown would probably be just as effective if they threw more, and he was an all-pro this year. But A.J. Brown in 2022, different beast. Like, I had to pick that version of him over this year. And then Alshon Jeffrey in 2017 was such a clutch player. I mean, the guy had, a torn shoulder, and he catches one of the most impressive touchdowns in a Super Bowl that I've ever seen. Like, completely changed the game for the Eagles at receiver. He was the wide receiver 1 they had been missing since Deshaun Jackson. One of the best playoff performances the Eagles have had in this era of, post-Chip Kelly era, if you will, the Howie Roseman era. Alshon was one of the most clutch players, even with the drop in New Orleans. Who he was in 2017, that was a beast. So I think it's A.J. Brown from 22, 2024 Devontae Smith, and then 2017 Alshon Jeffrey. At tight end, I did have trouble with this one. I picked 2017 Zach Ertz, but I almost picked 2024 Dallas Goedert. Because even though with the injuries in the regular season, what he's doing in the playoffs, and I think he was set to have a career year if he didn't get hurt. That Saints game showed me Dallas Goedert was ready to blow up. And the playoffs have kind of confirmed that for me. So his playoff numbers, I saw this on PFF today, 16 receptions, 206 yards in 3 games, 148 yards after the catch, 5 receptions of 15-plus yards, 0 drops. This year's Dallas Goedert, on another level. But 2017 Zach Ertz, one of the best route runners in football. I mean, just look what he did to Harrison Smith in the NFC title. In the Super Bowl, he's got the 2 biggest plays of the game, the 4th-and-1 conversion in the fourth quarter with the game on the line, and then the game-winning touchdown on the left side of the field, that beautiful in-cut. I mean, Zach Ertz in 2017, I can't leave him off the list. So it was close. 2022 Dallas Goedert was really good as well, but I put the 2017 version of Zach Ertz at tight end. Then my offensive line, a lot of these guys are the same players, so I took different versions of them. This year's Jordan Mailata was PFF's number 1 graded overall NFL player. Thought it was obvious to put him at left tackle, although shout out to Big V. Left guard, this year's version of Landon Dickerson. At center, I did put 2022 Jason Kelce. I thought that was one of the best years of his career, even over 2017. Right guard, we got to put Brandon Brooks. What he did in 2017 was unbelievable. One of the most underrated players in Eagles history. And then right tackle, it's tough. I mean, pick your version of Lane Johnson, but the guy didn't allow a single sack that year. He didn't this year either, but 2022 Lane Johnson was prime. I mean, 2022 Lane Johnson was on another level. So it's tough because a lot of these guys have had so many elite seasons. Like, you could make the case for 2017 Jason Kelce at center, 2022 Landon Dickerson at left guard. Even Isaac Seumalo in 2022 had an unbelievable year, an underratedly elite year that got him absolutely paid in Pittsburgh. You could even put him at right guard, but what Brandon Brooks did 2017, unmatched. So that's my offense. Let me know if you agree. Hit me up on X at DiBiase, at Locked On Birds. I'll post this graphic so you guys can check it out after the show as well and kind of discuss it. We'll do a nice little back and forth on our YouTube community page as well. I want to get into the defense coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. So here's how it works. All you got to do, pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game, where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, preferably with the Eagles, and you're cashing out. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, we continue on the unveiling of my ultimate Super Bowl roster for the Philadelphia Eagles, combining 3 teams: the 2017 Super Bowl champs, the 2022 Super Bowl runner-ups, and the 2024, who knows, Super Bowl team of the Philadelphia Eagles. On offense, as you guys saw, broke it down in segment 1. I'll post that graphic on our YouTube community page and our X page as well after the show to check it out. On defense, let's start off on the defensive line. At edge, and this is actually very surprising that I only had 1 player from 2022, and you might disagree with that because that's like one of the greatest defensive lines in NFL history. They almost broke the 80s Bears single season sack record. Just ridiculous. And so, of course, I had to put Hassan Reddick, the 2022 Hassan Reddick, at edge. Over 19 sacks, combining the regular season and the playoffs. One of the most clutch players an Eagles defensive player has ever been. Especially in the postseason, just ridiculous. So Hassan's got to be one of your edge rushers. But after that, they were such a good group, but I couldn't put, I thought about putting 2022 Javon Hargrave on this list. I thought about 2022 Josh Sweat. Fletcher Cox even was underrated in 2022. So was Brandon Graham. They combined for 18 sacks total. 7 for Cox, 11 for Brandon Graham, which is a career high, but you can't keep off 2024 Jalen Carter. I mean, this is one of the best players, a single season, most dominant player in Eagles history. And who are you putting over him? It's not Javon Hargrave. It's not 2022 Fletcher Cox. Jalen Carter absolutely belongs on that list. And I think, even though the numbers aren't as good as Hargrave and even Fletch from 2022, 2017 Fletcher Cox was one of the best players in the NFL, right? I think most of you would agree that we got to put 2017 Fletch there. And then at edge, Brandon Graham is the other guy on the other side, the 2017 version. Just like 2017 Fletcher Cox, didn't have over 10 sacks, but was one of the top players in the league in efficiency, getting to the quarterback, pass rush, win rate, total pressures on the year, was one of PFF's consistently that year top graded players, and he made the biggest play in Eagles history. In the fourth quarter, nothing the 2022 Eagles defensive line could do to Patrick Mahomes, Brandon Graham did in the fourth quarter with the strip sack on Tom Brady. Nobody in 2022 made that play. So how do I keep 2017 BG off the list? I can't. So I was very surprised that only 1 2022 defensive lineman was on there. But once you break it down, it's really not that surprising. The pure dominance of 2024 Jalen Carter. I mean, where would we be without his dominant playoff run, especially that LA game? Fletcher Cox in 2017 was one of the best players in the NFL, and Brandon Graham in 2017 made the biggest play in franchise history. So I had to keep them on that list. And then at linebacker, I went with 2024 Zach Bond and 2017 Nigel Bradham. That probably doesn't surprise you either. Zach Bond, a first-team All-Pro. 2017 Nigel Bradham, underrated. I almost put 2022 TJ Edwards on the list, but 2017 Nigel Bradham, when Jordan Hicks went down, that dude was all over the field. And remember, with Jim Schwartz, a lot of the time, they only played one linebacker. Michael Kendricks would rotate in, but Nigel was your every down linebacker. He was your green dot play caller. He was one of your best players against the run. He was good in coverage. Like, he could fly sideline to sideline. I think people forget Nigel Bradham was really, really good in 2017. No, I did not put Donnell Ellerbe from 2017 on that list. You guys are all probably like, holy crap, I forgot he was an Eagle that year. So yeah, I think special shout out to TJ Edwards. This year's Nakobe Dean as well had a good case, but I think this year's Zach Bond and 2017's Nigel Bradham makes the most sense. And then a cornerback, two players from this year, Quinyon Mitchell on the outside, Cooper DeJean in the slot, although shout out to Eagles hero Patrick Robinson. 2022 Avonte Maddox was pretty good as well, but Cooper DeJean, one of the best slot corners in the league this year. And then Quinyon Mitchell, I mean, these two combined had two of the best rookie years we've seen from a corner, both Rookie of the Year finalists in the NFL. And then I did put 2022's Darius Slay. I thought about 2022 James Bradbury, but Slay, I think, was still even though Bradbury was the All-Pro, I still think Slay was the better player, and I constantly go back to that performance against Justin Jefferson earlier in the year. He dropped off a little bit at the end of the year, but Darius Slay was still a better player in 22 than, I would say, Bradbury or anybody from 2017. And then at safety, one player from this year, one from 2017. This year's version of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, I'd put ahead of 2022's CGJ. And then, of course, 2017 Malcolm Jenkins wore every hat imaginable on defense. He was the heartbeat of that defense, the vocal leader. He'd play slot corner, box linebacker, deep safety. I mean, that guy did everything. He took out Brandon Cooks in that game. And if he doesn't do that, do they win? I don't know, because Brandon Cooks was shredding those corners. So Malcolm Jenkins, of course, is on there. Special shout out to Rodney McLeod. But this year's Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, the heartbeat of this year's defense. And unlike 2022, he's a better leader. He's a much more physical player. I mean, the tackling after the bye week was unbelievable. And he had 6 interceptions. So he matched what he did interception-wise in 2022. He was so good in like third and short situations. Like, look at the plays he made against the Rams in those situations, against the Commanders. Even earlier in the year, like against Atlanta week 2, and a gotta have it moment on 4th and short. Like, Chauncey set the tone. He was your tone setter. Like, let's be real. You can say that about Jalen Carter and Zach Bond, and Darius Slay was one of your leaders, but Chauncey was the energy. I think he stepped it up. He took it up a notch from 2022. So I put Chauncey there, this year's version, and then Malcolm Jenkins from 2017. So overall, if I have to count that up, so we have 9 players from 2024, if I'm not mistaken. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep, 9 players from 2024. That leads the ultimate team. So the most players of those 3 teams did come from this year's Eagles. From 2022, we had, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 players from 2022. And then from 2017, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So actually, the 2022 team, which I said at one point on this podcast was the greatest roster in Eagles history, I actually have more players from 2017 and 2024. 9 players from 2024, 7 from 2017, and then 6 from 2022. So I think it makes sense, though. I think you could go, again, there's a couple spots you could argue for 22, like TJ Edwards at linebacker, maybe over Nigel Bradham. You could argue for 2021 Josh Sweat or 2022 Javon Hargrave. But overall, I think that's the right team. I don't know if there's any like obvious ones that I missed. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on X at DiBiase LOE at Locked On Birds, and hit us up on our YouTube community page. All right, we'll wrap up the show. Coming up next, I want to tell you guys why this Eagles run since 2020, it's got Hollywood written all over it. I'll tell you why coming up as we wrap up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by TurboTax. This message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes were waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then they were waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. You can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Hope you guys enjoyed that exercise. Our 2017 to 2024 Ultimate Super Bowl team. Our starting lineup of offensive and defensive players created from those 3 Super Bowl rosters that Howie Roseman has put together. And when I was putting that together, I was just thinking about just going down memory lane and reflecting. And it's not a time for reflection yet. They've got one more game. They've got to win it all. And we'll continue to preview Eagles-Chiefs this week and all of next week. I'll be down in New Orleans for Radio Row starting Friday. I'll be at Media Day Monday. I cannot wait for that. I'm going to try to talk to Carson Wentz. We'll see if I can get that. But anyway, and so I was just kind of taking a trip down memory lane, though. It's hard for me not to do that, especially when you're, comparing this Eagles team to history. That's kind of what I love to do, and I think you guys know that on the show. I do that a lot. And I was just thinking how it is surreal. No team, I don't think, has ever, and teams have gone through chaos in sports, in basketball, football, baseball, hockey, golf. I mean, there's some pretty crazy stories that almost feel scripted. But what has happened, and you could even go back to 2015 and on, in the post-Chip Kelly world, Howie Roseman's second tenure in Philadelphia feels like a script. It feels like a fever dream, and it just feels like a movie. It feels like this sequence of events could not transpire in the order it did. But especially after 2020, to see where they are now, I mean, what a roller coaster ride. That's such an understatement. How many teams, they won a Super Bowl. That quarterback and head coach era only lasts for 4 more years, and then it's over. And then you think, this team has such a long way to go now. Like, here comes a rebuild. And to see where they were, like Nick Sirianni's first press conference, how bad it went. And Carson Wentz demands a trade. You don't know what you got in Jalen Hurts. And then they start 2-5 in 2021. They rattle off 7 wins of 9 games, and they make the postseason. But then that offseason, you're not convinced about Jalen. So how he nearly pulls off trades for Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson. He's considering trading up for Zach Wilson if the Jets, didn't want him at pick number 2. There's so many moments where all of this doesn't happen. And yet it all did. And the way it did, it's truly unbelievable. Every moment had to be perfect for this all to play out. And then you get A.J. Brown, and Jalen Hurts does what I didn't think was possible, becomes an MVP candidate in 2022. And then you lose a heartbreaking Super Bowl. And then last year's collapse. And you're thinking, there's no way, like here it comes again. Just like after 2017, like this is kind of just what happens in Eagles history, right? This is just the natural life cycle of a coach and a quarterback in the Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie world. And then the 2-2 start, right? Nick Sirianni shaves off his hair. He gets a buzz cut. He's yelling at Eagles fans after the Browns game. I was there for that one. I thought still they won at 3-2, and I'm like, doesn't matter. They need to fire the coach. I started questioning Jalen Hurts. I didn't know. I was back to like 2021, Lou, thinking, is he the future? Like, I'll be honest. You guys heard those few shows. I was starting to get a little bit nervous that the same thing that happened before is happening again. And now, and you win 10 straight games, and you put up 55, almost 60 points in an NFC title, and now you have a rematch with Pat Mahomes. Like, just that breakdown, doesn't it sound ridiculous? What has happened is just, it's drugs. It's literally a fever dream. It's something that you would script the highs and lows of this football team over the last even just alone in the Hurts Sirianni era. But then if you stretch it back to from 2017 and on, it's ridiculous. And how funny that it all comes to full circle, that the guy that kind of started this entire era, or started it all with the contending for championships, trading up for Carson Wentz, that guy is going to be the backup against the Eagles. He's going to be on the sideline watching another one of his backups play in a Super Bowl in the midnight green. The fact that they are one play away from it being a Carson Wentz versus Jalen Hurts Super Bowl, and we should want that because Carson's terrible at this point. But like this just, the story continues with just these surreal, like unbelievable. If you told me like this was a real thing, I'd say you're lying. This is scripted. Like it's all fan fiction, and it's not. It's just, I don't know. I don't know if you guys think that, if I'm reading too much into it, but how lucky they are that a lot of this has gone the way it has, but also like how impressive it is that all of that can happen to Nick, to Jalen, to Howie, and they can still make 2 of 3 Super Bowls. They can still get back there when NFL history tells you a lot of the time that's not the way it works. Like when you fire a Super Bowl head coach and you lose your franchise quarterback, it normally doesn't take 2 years to get back. Right? If and then, you collapse like last year and you lose a Super Bowl. Normally, you lose your first Super Bowl in that fashion. Ask the Atlanta Falcons. Or if you lose a Super Bowl in that way, no matter what appearance it is, ask the Seattle Seahawks. Normally, you don't get back as quickly as the Eagles did. If you collapse like they did last year, especially, that normally signals the end of that core, especially when you have a start like you did in September this year. I mean, all of this just has happened in such a insane way. And again, now is not the time for full reflection because the year is not over and we need this to end in confetti. But doing that ultimate exercise just kind of got me thinking about how crazy this all is. I mean, just really the my Locked On Eagles era, ever since taking over for Michael Kiss and Ben Solak after the 2017 season, the post-Super Bowl era, the 7 seasons I've been doing this podcast, I can't believe the way those 7 seasons have gone. It's incredible. They've made the playoffs in 7 of 8 years. So they're one of the most consistent teams. They've made it to 3 NFC titles, 3 Super Bowls in that run. So it feels like this is one of the most consistent teams in the NFL, and that's a fact. But there's been so much inconsistency in that consistency. It's like consistency through chaos. It's such an oxymoron, but that's Philadelphia, and I guess it makes sense, right? This team, like this is how they do it. It's stressful a lot of the time. It's chaos. It's unpredictable, but they find a way the vast majority of the time. So I don't know. I just thought that was kind of cool. And the Wentz thing got me thinking about too, how this all coming full circle. I mean, Carson Wentz is going to be on the other sidelines in an Eagles Super Bowl. I truly do wonder how he's feeling. I would love to in Media Day talk to him about that. I'm going to try to talk to some players, so I'll have a lot of coverage for you guys. Still got 2 more shows for you this week. We'll start diving into the matchup between the Eagles and the Chiefs, and then I'll be down in New Orleans for 5 days, so I'll have a lot of coverage for you on our YouTube channel, on our podcast feeds as well. So until then, I'm going to sign off for now. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Louie DiBiase signing off. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.